Okay, very good afternoon to everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. I hope there would be more people. Yes, please come and have a seat joining us today, but we don't want to keep you waiting, so we will start with a few opening remarks from these two gentlemen in the front. Before doing that, I just want to welcome you on behalf of the Asia Europa Foundation and Casa Asia to this conversation on cultural diplomacy with our panel of lovely ladies that I will introduce to you later. So without taking too much time, I would like to first invite Mr. Munoz to say a few words, please.
Hello and good afternoon. On behalf of the Barcelona City Council and on behalf of the Museu Etnològic i de Cultures del Món, it's a true pleasure to host this event in here. Since we know that Mondia Cult was taking place in Barcelona, we had another opportunity to ask ourselves about our role in society and the role of cities in making the world a better place and a place of understanding. For me, it's quite obvious that these days it's more needed than ever to create these frameworks and to create these spaces of cultural encounter, such as this session or such as this museum. I know that this session will take for around 2 hours, but the museum will be open for another hour once we are done. I invite you to take a stroll around the museum. The museum is big and has actually 2 venues, but if you want to visit the exhibition on Senegal tapestry, you will see how do we try to work in here, meaning explaining our own history and explaining how did we reach the rest of the world. I mean the Barcelona City Council, but the Europeans, trying to explain what did we learn and what did we miss in these learnings, and trying to bring voices from the original communities to provide us context about what are we actually seeing and what have we actually done. So museums and cities need to be part of this exchange of knowledge and this exchange of understanding, and this very museum works with this aim, as do the rest of the museums of the city. I don't know how many of you live in Barcelona or how many of you are just visiting these days, but I strongly invite you to take part in all the La Mercè activity and to visit as much cultural venues as you can, and you will see how Barcelona works with adapting and understanding all the cultures that live within this city. Barcelona for 2,000 years has been a city of migrations, a city of new citizens, and a city of tradition. And I think that so far we did a good job mixing them together and trying to reach out to every single person that lives here or is visiting. So please feel very welcome in our city and in this very museum. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And yes, I invite you to go and visit the museum. I will go as well, so let's make sure we finish by 6:30, so we have time. Can I invite now the Director General Casa Asia to say a few words?
Thank you everybody, good afternoon. So thank you for joining us, first of all, to this event, to this roundtable about rethinking cultural diplomacy together, co-organized by ASEF, the Asia y Europa Foundation, Casa Asia, with the collaboration of the Museu Etnològic i de les Cultures del Món, who kindly hosts us today in this beautiful venue. Thank you also to all participants, to the panelists especially. because some of them came from very far away. So it's a real pleasure and a luxury to have this panel today, and to the teams of all the institutions that have helped us to organize all these events. So allow me, I want to be brief, but allow me just to give you some context about this activity in my dual capacity today as Director General of CASASIA, but also as a Spanish governor of ASEF, of the Asia and Europe Foundation. And this is not difficult because finally we share a little bit the same mission, the same vision also, which is to strengthen the connections between Asian and European societies through people-to-people dialogue and understanding. ASEF, it's currently the only international organization that brings together governments from both the European Union and Asia-Pacific region. It has become a privileged platform to exchange perspectives and work together to identify meaningful opportunities for cooperation between both our peoples. And on our side, CASASIA is the Spanish leading institution now for public diplomacy with the Asia-Pacific region. We have already nearly 25 years of experience, and we have become a key partner in a wide range of initiatives that across sectors such as culture, education, scientific cooperation, social and political dialogue. We try to foster meaningful connections between the Spanish and Asian societies with an approach grounded always in respect and mutual listening. This is what we call public diplomacy, and I believe that in this context, in this international context today, that you all already are perfectly aware, public diplomacy is more important than ever, because the challenges that we are facing today affect the whole of our societies, not only our governments, and it's important to create these spaces, these platforms of dialogue in order to allow civil society actors to bring forefront shared concerns and put them on the table. Because also public diplomacy and cultural diplomacy specifically allows us to create our own voice, our own identity in this international context. And this is very important, to have our identity as Catalan, as Spanish, as European, but also as Asian, with our own narrative, championing for multilateralism and to tackle shared global challenges. And because also the erosion of the international institution has been accompanied by new risks of social fragmentation, as you know. So in this context, the institutions like ASEF and CASASIA, I think, are called to play a very important role to bring countries together, to increase our mutual knowledge, to amplify the contributions of diasporas, to build inclusive and democratic societies finally in our countries. That is why we are working also in a new strategic framework for the next years, and we have included some key priorities that we think are going to be very important and are vital in the next years, which are advancing towards gender equality, placing interculturality always at the core of our mission, promoting sustainability as a shared global objective, and integrating innovative approaches and tools to fulfill our mission. And the aim of this roundtable is precisely that, to bring this innovative approach on the cultural diplomacy side from both Asian and European perspectives. And I think it's a very bold, critical, and innovative approach, in fact. We must admit that cultural institutions have our own limitations, and we are not always ready to include issues like unequal access to international platforms, the lack of inclusiveness when we talk about cultural diplomacy, and this is why we are here today, to talk about these important issues. Both ASEF and CASASIA shared a strong commitment to rethinking cultural diplomacy as a horizontal process, not a vertical, hierarchical process, but a horizontal, as I said, and not a top-down exercise. And I think this is a very mature debate that we have to have nowadays. We have to reflect on that, how we have been doing public diplomacy, public cultural diplomacy, and how we can change it, and to be sincere and honest about how culture is shared, who participates in this process, and under what terms. the fact that this is framed between the in the Mondial Cult event in the UNESCO, it's a commitment also and a strategic vision that this is not an isolated event. It is a debate that we want to include in the political agenda, and we want to continue during the next months. So thank you very much again for coming, and I hope that you enjoy the discussions. Thank you.
Sorry. Okay, so let's start. Before I give the floor to the speakers, I just wanted to say a few words about this roundtable and again where it's coming from, because I think two things. ASEF has been doing this kind of conversation for a long time, and I think especially after COVID, we really try to respond to, I would say, strong gaps that we notice and that our stakeholders notice in terms of creating these spaces for dialogue. So this is not just a one-off that came out of our intention or our idea of putting together a nice group of speakers, but I think since 2022, through a series of consultation, around 60 to 70 consultation, what really came out very strongly is that there is not enough spaces for civil society representative from the art sector to have conversation with governments in a very safe space that doesn't necessarily have any transactional side to it, so not, with the idea of doing a project together, but really with the idea of coming to a place where you can share where you're coming from, what limitation you have as an institution, what challenges you face as an artist or an arts professional. And I think this is where we created this platform of ASEF LinkUp, which is the reason why we are here today, a project that started not long ago, 2023, but we have already worked on 3 editions. The last one was back in June in Indonesia, so the first was in Singapore, then we did it in Prague last year, and in Yogyakarta this year. And I think it's evolving, but what is really interesting is that every time we invite around 20 to 22 between government, non-government, both independent sector, Institute of Culture representative, MFA representative, organizations that are bridging the two sides, but also regular artists or practitioner that, of course, come from a very different kind of perspective. What really is interesting in this exchange, which is a closed-door exchange that happens over 4 days, usually 4 to 5 days, it has an online part before, so the participants get to know each other before, then they meet, and they really are also brought together with the context of the city where the event happens. But what is really interesting is that from both sides, there's some kind of revelation, which is very strange, on, oh my God, you are working in the same thing that I work with, but we really never meet. We really never have a time to really reflect with each other how different maybe we come from in terms of, entry point, but then at the end of the day, we are all part of this amazing thing, which is working in culture internationally across countries, across regions. So this last ASEF LinkUp in June reflected specifically on the idea of inclusion and how we can rethink cultural diplomacy together. It sounds like an obvious thing, but actually it's not so obvious, because as you can imagine, again, a lot of people don't have access to this kind of conversations. So we managed to do that, and I think the discussion were really interesting because it was really about how can we make sure that we bring in everybody in this sort of project together, not really as a token, which is something that sometimes happens, but really effectively. How can we do that? And very practically also, because we talk about big concept, exchanges, diplomacy, and most of the time this can happen in a very abstract way, but then reflections on the work that we do daily is also very important. So this is why we came up with a report which is what you will see later. We have a few copies, and we'll share also a QR code. And it's, I think, at the core of what we want to discuss today, which is basically how can cultural diplomacy become not only about states and institutions, but also about communities, about care, about shared responsibility. And for shared responsibility, we really took this concept that is very Indonesian, and Oming will maybe tell us a bit more about that, of gotong royong, which is, it means basically being collectively responsible for what we want to do together. And I think this was an amazing inspiration for this group and for the conversation that we did have and for the results that are coming to this report. So let me start by giving the floor to each one of them to introduce themselves. I think that's the best way to do it. And then we will start the discussion. Maybe before that, just a couple of points that you will see reflected in the discussion and in the report would be about three main areas, and that's the three questions that we will discuss. The first one is how we can go from principle to practice and basically use this laboratory of cultural diplomacy in action. The second is about representation and inclusion, so examples that our speakers will share about this. And then the main point of impact, sustainability, how do we go forward with this kind of discussions. So we have, from far to near, Claire Wilson, who's based in Barcelona and is originally from Australia, Oming Putri from Indonesia, Jakarta, Chuenjo from Spain, originally Chinese, but from Spain, and then Gaël Patin-Lalois, who probably you know well, who's representing today Casa Asia, two hats, and also the Confucius Institute in Barcelona. If you want to take a few minutes to introduce yourself, thank you. We start with Claire.
Hi, thank you all for coming today. It's a great pleasure to talk about these topics. So my name is Claire, and I'm a writer, editor, and researcher. And one of my roles is working with the Asia Europe Foundation on their cultural platform called Culture 360. So it's really putting opportunities, news and events and trying to make it as widely accessible as possible. And I think that's kind of what some of us touched upon to start off with, is the accessibility, particularly between Asia and Europe, is not always very equal. So this is kind of a platform to try and address that. So I'm very interested in sharing resources and developing these platforms to kind of address this imbalance. And it's sort of an area that I've been working in for several years, particularly in the international context. So how we can have intercultural creative practice as a space for conversations that perhaps are quite difficult, a space for experimentation. So that's kind of what I've been working with.
Oming.
Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. Thank you for ASEF and Casa Asia for inviting me to join this panel. My name is Oming. You can see my name there. Well, actually, I see myself as a nurturer and connector between artists, government, and other stakeholders in the arts ecosystem in Indonesia. I work for Koalisi Seni. This is a non-profit organization formed by artists in 2012. And this organization actually focuses on advocates for a better policies, public policies in Indonesia to protect artists' rights. And I've been working for this organization about 11 years this year. And before I worked as a partnership manager, I worked under advocacy division for about 9 years. So thank you.
Thank you, Ming.
Hi. ¿Yo lo puedo mention?
Oh, yes.
Sí.
She has a
Sí. ¿Las pasas tú?
Yes.
Okay. Hi, everybody. I think I'm feeling very intimidated because it's such a distinguished people coming here today. So my name is in Chinese Dou Chuan because we have family name before. And I'm a graphic novelist, an author, a multidisciplinary artist, basically. Last year in 2024, I was honorary chair of Spanish Culture and Civilization at NYU, and many, many titles, but whatever, no problem. What I want to say is I'm a self-taught artist. I talk about the children of immigrants' life in Spain. My first book, published 10 years ago, Gazpacho Agridulce, according to the Iberian Peninsula studies in US, people such as Mary Kate Donovan from Skidmore, it's the first book published in contemporary Spain made by a person from a migrant family. So that's why my book is widely known, mostly in United States, and everything in Spanish. Everything in Spanish. So those comics that you're seeing is sort of a few selected art pieces that are in English, but you can read them in Spanish-born Chinese account and Instagram. But if you can read Spanish, you can also get my books everywhere, basically, because they're all everywhere and on Instagram. I want to take a moment just to set up my background. I come from a working class family, and if you're familiar with the Chinese migration in Spain in the 90s, mostly, we are not from educated backgrounds. My parents did restaurants, so we are from a place, it used to be a rural place, but not anymore. It's called Xinjiang. And that place is so important for the migration of the Chinese migration to Europe, especially to Italy, Spain, France, for example, from that we were 60% of the Chinese population in Spain. Because they are not migrating anymore. So that is very important, because if you don't get where I come from, I don't think you will get why my answers are the way they are, because I am very class conscious and class centered artist, and I talk about gender, class, and racism, and with a lot of humor, which is also an unusual combination. So thank you.
Thank you, Sven. Gael?
Hello, I'm Gael. I don't have such a fascinating life. But I'm working at Casa Asia and proud to be working at Casa Asia, which is this wonderful public diplomacy institution where we really try to make a change and to create connections. Actually, if I think with this difficult question, I try to think what am I? So I really feel I'm a bridge. And what do? I connect people. I think it's what I do in my work. And also I'm a co-director of the Confucius Institute of Barcelona, thanks to a close connection of Casa Asia as member of the board of the Confucius Institute, along with the University of Barcelona, Autonomous University of Barcelona, and the Beijing Foreign Affairs University, BeiWai. And it's also a wonderful experience, because we really experience intercultural negotiation and cooperation with two directors from China and local, and coordinators who are also a mixed team of Chinese and non-Chinese professionals, and a group of professors who are also half coming from China and half local. So thank you.
Great. All right, let's get into the middle of this conversation with the first question. So I'm going to start with a general question, and then maybe each one of you can talk about it from your perspective. Shall we just look at cultural diplomacy? What does it mean for you in terms of inclusion? So building on your experiences, which are very diverse, coming from very different backgrounds, artistic practice, policy, advocacy, public diplomacy institution, what does collective responsibility in cultural diplomacy look like in practice for you? And maybe, Oming, we can start with you, because I was thinking, as someone who's really advocating for artistic freedom, artist rights, and cultural policy reform in Indonesia, how do you see collective responsibility shaping diplomacy? And maybe you can share if LinkUp, because Oming was also one of the participants of our program this year, had some impact on the way you see this in your work.
Okay.
Thank you, Valentina. To be honest, actually, I wrote a script for this question because it's important for me to write it down, because I don't use English in my daily life. So, yeah. To answer your question, for me, I see cultural diplomacy is more about the people. So the people who practice their culture in daily life. So for me, it's important to make sure that their rights to practice their culture is protected in their home. So the next question is how we can do that, how we can protect people's right to practice their culture. So for me, this is where collective effort takes place. So yeah, as you know, I come from this big country. Indonesia is a really big country. It's the fourth most populated country in the world. And we have like 270 million people and 1,340 tribes. So you can imagine how big it is. So that also means we cannot work alone on this. So for advocating artistic freedom for Koalisi Seni, we need at least like 4 stakeholders to get together. We need the media, especially local media, to cover the violation cases that happen on the ground. So their reporting serves not only to raise public awareness, but also a vital source of data for monitoring artistic freedom. And second, we also need the legal aid organization to provide legal assistance for the victims. And we need also fellow activists who work both on culture and human rights issues from Indonesia and other Asian countries with similar challenges to form a support network to share strategies and solidarity. And we also need them to promote the understanding that artistic freedom is an integral part of human rights. And we also need artists to be aware of their rights and report violation on artistic freedom in our platform. Actually, we developed this monitoring system for artistic freedom with support from UNESCO. So we can amplify it to push for change. And the last stakeholders, we need the government to repeal all forms of censorship and criminalization threats within legislation and regulations. And also we need the government to promote awareness and understanding of artistic freedom across all levels of law enforcement. So for me to mobilize this collective effort, this is also what I've learned from ASEF LinkUp. We need to listen with care in making sure the responsibility is shared and to be aware of inequality in resources and power within the collective so we can know when to step in to help. And this also means to acknowledge our limitations so we can know when to ask for help. And yeah, that's what I've learned. So thank you, ASEF LinkUp.
Thanks. I mean, you summarized perfectly, I think, the objectives of what we did. And I think the idea of having so many different people who really are so essential towards a common goal is something really important, and the challenge as well, right?
Yeah.
Let's move on to Tran. Maybe from your perspective, more as an artist, illustrator, have you come across this idea of collective responsibility? What is your take on this?
You know, I need to send on ChatGPT what cultural diplomacy was because I had no idea. So what it is.
That's a very good way to start.
So yeah, I come from civil society and I'm an independent artist, so it makes me think about the language. So when you say cultural diplomacy, who are you speaking for? I'm not an educated person anymore, but if I don't understand, who are you speaking to? Is the diplomacy speaking to the diplomacy people? Are the politicians speaking to the politicians? So what about the civil society? What about the people that come from uneducated places? Or what about, like myself, children of immigrants? So what happens when cultural diplomacy cannot help to inspire the kids? What happens when those kids are left out? How can we overstep the alienation? Because maybe the people will think, oh, they are very interested in diplomacy or the idea of diplomacy, but they just don't have role models. Or they think that maybe the international studies, art studies, I didn't study fine art because I thought it was not for me. I have not seen any role model like me in Spain. So you can get the wrong idea that maybe arts, maybe diplomacy, maybe politics is not for you because you have nobody that inspires you. Maybe the language is so complicated, maybe you need extra help. So in order of define what is collective responsibility is also to help people get educated to have easy access and free access and public access to education. Because otherwise, in academia world now, they are talking about ivory tower. Academia speak to academia. And I'm always telling how I want to get out the knowledge. Because why I don't have access to my own history? Why all those papers about Xinjiang locked inside Zhejiang University or locked inside La Universidad de Madrid or La UAB, and I don't have access to those papers talking about my family and me ultimately. So I think the collective responsibility is also ensuring easy access to culture, easy access to understand what cultural diplomacy could be. So we are not closed or in this box of the ivory tower, not in the academia, not even in politics.
I mean, thanks. I think you also touched on a very important point, because language, sometimes we tend to use terms that are more, terms that are understood by certain kind of groups. If you work in governments, already the term diplomacy is very much referring to that. So opening out and reaching out of those traditional group or organization or institution is always a challenge, and maybe changing terms is also a point that we should think of. Let's look at the institutional side of things, so completely different angle. What do you think, Gael, from your point of view? I mean, is it more like how can public diplomacy initiative move from state priority to including more communities and things like that?
First, I just add this reflection to what I'm going to say. Before I was thinking, in institutions there are people, and I really feel also I'm working on people-to-people dialogue within the framework of an institution, so I can receive support from the institution to take into practice some of the outcomes of those dialogues. First, it looks obvious, but as Jose Pintor mentioned, we need to start to work more horizontally, of course, to engage with all stakeholders in public diplomacy, which include governments, institutions, artists, maybe, why not, academia, civil society, which also includes, of course, diasporas. We also, at the Asia Europa level, we also have to change the mindsets. Not long ago, I read some text saying that Europe will explain to Asia how we fight against climate change, something like this. So now we really have to engage into dialogue to share good practices and work together. It's what Oming was mentioning about listening with care. I would add active listening, just listening and being able to put the tools to actually put into practice some of those issues. Also, just building, I skip some things because Valentina told me not to talk too much. building collective the responsibility and engaging with civil society brings three advantages to public institutions. It complements government-led diplomacy. It nourishes it by bringing new perspectives, new contacts, also innovation, and I would add creativity, and above all, it secures sustainability, because where governments sometimes fail to continue with dialogue, people-to-people cultural diplomacy, I would say, can assure a longer-term dialogue. Just two quick examples, because I was asked to explain this from my experience at Casa Asia and Confucius Institute. We are really trying to change things. At Casa Asia, for example, we are in the process of finishing the strategy, our strategy for the next years, as Jose mentioned, and we organized working groups with several members of the civil society and public and private institutions. So we really try to make this useful and have this input put into practice. And we also collaborated with the Catalan government to organize the same kind of working groups on several issues: education, culture, intercultural issues, and economics, and also climate change. And I think this is an effort to work more horizontally. Those spaces also provided opportunities for networking between people. I heard many people trying to speak, to collaborate directly, so I think it was really useful. And last, and also at Casa Asia, another example is on Sunday, we have this concert of a Pakistani group, a group coming from Pakistan with a young woman singer. It's been several years. We collaborate with La Merced. We had a small gap because of some circumstances, but we are happy now. This collaboration involved Pakistani community, Pakistan consulate and embassy, and also La Merced, so a whole set of actors. And so I think it's one way to work horizontally. And just 1 second for the Confucius Institute. I mentioned before that it was really an intercultural framework and structure. And I also want to stress that the Confucius Institute is born from an idea of the Chinese, in the framework of the Chinese cultural diplomacy, because the objective is to promote Chinese language and culture. But I think because of this collaboration within the boards and among workers, it really also serves local cultural diplomacy, Spanish cultural diplomacy, definitely. So I think it's an example where if we work more horizontally in cultural diplomacy, it's not a one-way event. It's not a one-way process. It's a two-way benefit, and in this example, we really have this exchange. And when the students go to China for the summer camp, they also promote the image of Barcelona, Catalonia, Spain, etc. And okay, thank you.
No, that's great. I mean, I think the examples are also helping, because otherwise we don't understand. I mean, the idea is how practically is this done. By the way, before we go to Claire, I just wanted to show you that this lovely drawing here is Oming's doing. Oming, one night, I think she was not able to sleep, and after we did the project in Indonesia, she came up with this, which is so nice and so really clear to me in terms of what you were saying also before, that we decided to ask her if we could use it as the cover of the report. So later, if you want, you can also ask her more about it. I just wanted to go to Claire now and ask you the same question, but also maybe a reflection on your participation last year in the previous edition. Claire was one of the facilitators of the ASEF LinkUp in Prague, which kind of started more on the principle and more on a high-level discussion to, start what's then continued this year. So maybe you can share a bit more on that.
Sure. And I'd like to also pick up on this idea of terminology of what is cultural diplomacy and how do I identify with cultural diplomacy, because I think the first conversations that we had in the lab, so we had people working sort of in institutes, and also civil society. So there were some artists, there were some people working for cultural organisations, and many were saying, I don't know if I do cultural diplomacy. Like, they work in it, they work in international relations, but they didn't really identify with the term of cultural diplomacy because it was seen as more of a state-led kind of official stamp in order to be doing cultural diplomacy. But I think what part of my reflection has been is that there is so much that's already happening on the people-to-people level, which we've kind of discussed here, that forms the way we think about a different culture as well. So, you know, me as an Australian sitting here talking about different examples or experiences might start to form an idea in your heads of, like, what is it like to be a cultural practitioner from Australia? So I think there's a lot there that perhaps, you know, we can sort of, help to sort of say, okay, this is part of cultural diplomacy, you know, on a more people-to-people level. And I think, as Valia was saying, for the Prague edition, we did start with talking about principles and then challenges and recommendations, but we really started with this idea of principles. To try and talk about the things that perhaps we don't have time to talk about when we implement projects. So when we're busy kind of getting a project done, we might not be talking so much about our ways of thinking or our ways of working or our frames which kind of form our experiences, which are very layered, which are cultural, which are institutional as well. So we really took this space to talk about that, and also trying to raise things like what kind of assumptions and blind spots and biases might we be bringing to this encounter that might be getting in the way of communication, for example. So it was kind of a space to think about that. And one thing that we're asking was, like, what is the underlying motivation of why we're doing what we're doing? You know, so it's we're doing, we might be doing a project or event, but why exactly are we doing this? And I think that's important to sort of recognise that maybe for artists or cultural organisations, working internationally is necessary for a sustainable career. So you might need to travel to access opportunities. You might need to travel to sort of maybe have the status of having this work overseas so that you can then work at home. But also it's very evident when you start a collaboration if someone's doing it insincerely or from a very kind of self-focused perspective. But we also have this ecosystem which sort of necessitates this, no? And there was one quote from one of the participants which kind of stuck with me, which was, the results of cultural cooperation should be better than if we did something on our own. And I thought that was it's quite simple, but it's something that really kind of I wanted to take with the encounters that I have, like, why am I doing this? Can I do this without involving an international exchange? Or how are we both bringing something even better to be born from this? So I think in these discussions on principles, a few things came up, like the equity of opportunities and access to resources was seen as kind of something that we need to work towards more. And I think platforms like Culture 360 are really important for at least trying to get the information to those who can take advantage of opportunities. And I think we sort of had a conversation about, you know, sometimes there are rights that artists have that they need to know more about, you know, that we need to make sure that they're getting all the information. And there is a great imbalance of opportunities as well. For example, on the platform of On the Move, they put up, you know, more than 600 calls a year, and 70% are to or from Europe. So that sort of really shows that there's still work that can be done there. So.
Thanks, Claire. Yeah, so I think this links quite well to the second part of the my second question, which is really about the representation and inclusion, because listening to what you said, I think the main points is that collective responsibility is really working together, but making sure we have access and give access to communities that actually not necessarily think they have a role to play or have a space in this dialogue on cultural diplomacy, looking at language and looking at doing this as horizontally as possible. So my second question would be, how can institutions, artists, organizations ensure that actually the underrepresented voices are part of this dialogue, but not just as a showcasing of it, but really effectively included in shaping agendas? And can you share maybe some examples of how this happened in your work? So maybe we start with Twen. You can maybe share a bit. I mean, for me, what I was telling you the other day is looking at diaspora artists, which are often spoken for and are often, utilized in a way as a token, and how you have navigated this, and how could institutions do better in this sense, in your experience? Also working with universities, I guess you had this kind of challenge.
Well, I must say, I barely work with universities in Spain. Most of my work are with top-tier universities abroad. Either it's in UK or mostly the US, but also, a lot of very prestigious universities outside, such as, I know everybody knows Stanford. There's a paper about me in Harvard. I've been visiting Brown University. I got some souvenirs. So there's top tier American universities. So in terms about artists being spoken for, I always felt like here there is kind of, there is a saying, giving voice, no? Dar voz in Spain. And people say like, they're giving you a favor, they're doing you a favor, like, I'm giving you voice to speak on this matter. And I think that is very patriotic, but patronizing way of doing this, because you are not giving me anything, I have my own voice. And this space that you're giving me, you're occupying it first. Because I'm an active part of this society, I'm an active artist. I don't need to thank you for a thing that is rightfully mine, such a space, to talk on my own. So being spoken for and tokenized, I think it's a daily basis in Spain, basically, because when you see companies, when you see also institution top down, where is the diversity? Yeah, on the bottom level, we are all equal. But what about up? In television, you can see how there's no racialized people writing the scripts. There is people cleaning the bathrooms, such as this one event I was attending for is about podcasting, and the only people that were not, I say, playing Spanish. So playing Spanish with no migrant descent, were only the cleaners. That's such a hard image, because those persons also might be like radio, maybe are into culture, but they don't have access. So being spoken for here, it's a thing that needs to go top down, the top institutionally, politically, culturally, the people who gives money for creating art, the people who are creating residency needs to be aware that this is an active work. You don't need just to put here is a grant and think people of lower class would just go there and get access, because maybe they even don't have the knowledge that is a grant out there to keep it. And the people who are having TV program, magazines, they are not doing any favor to have somebody writing. I mean, there should be a reflection on society in the culture that society is making. And I have the numbers. So right now we are 47 million people, and because the Iberian Peninsula, just take into account the nationality, 13% are legal migrants. That's the only thing that Spain has is a data. But if you are naturalized, you are outside that data. So that you don't know how many naturalized children of immigrant people or color or racialized people there are, not the real number. And you don't know how irregular migration there are. But the thing is, you can look at the streets and then you look at TV and then you look at the books that are published and then look who is the boss of this newspaper, and all of the name is kind of familiar. There's not a name like mine over there. So spoken for, sadly, it's very basic nowadays in the Iberian Peninsula, and there's a lot of work to do. First of all, acknowledgement that we are not begging for what's rightfully ours. This is, I think, the natural result of a society that is changing. So in order for the culture, in order for inspire new generations, we need to keep working to have better institutions, better culture, better access to those young people that are now already not good. The young people are now already in such a difficult spot. So.
And then what you were saying before about the education, maybe this is also something that should start now, so that younger people, young generation who are in school, get to see different models growing up, so that, this kind of understanding or idea that they see around them is changing already when they're young. So you were saying also earlier. Okay, Oming. Yes.
Yeah.
So for you, Quality Seni works to amplify diverse voices, and you try to connect this to the policy level. So what you were saying before, there's so many people involved in this process. Do you have any examples of when inclusion was really real and moved, beyond this idea of, like Chuan was saying, we have an artist there who's from a different community. And I think within Indonesia, as you were saying, it's a huge country.
It's huge.
So many different islands. I mean, even from an external point of view, it's always about Java. It's always about what's happening around Jakarta, Bali, and then the rest of the country. I don't know. How does that work? Can you share a bit?
Well, thank you for the question. And it's true, Indonesia is so big. And unfortunately, the only organization that working on public policy advocacy in art sectors is only Koalisi Seni. So we kind of like have this big burden in our shoulder. And actually, in my experience, communicate with the government. So this is the situation. So to push our agenda in Indonesian government, in my experience, we need to get their trust, right? So usually the government need an actionable policy recommendations that can be applied in all regions and in all art sector. They just want to have a easy way to get it, right?
Like a blanket kind of thing.
Yeah. They don't want to have this. They want to spend a lot of budget to go to another regions in Indonesia to get to get artists' aspiration about what they need. So in 2012, when Koalisi Seni formed by artists, actually this is why our founder create this organization, because they want to amplify artists' voices. And they need a dedicated organization to translate artists' needs into policy recommendation, because it's really challenging to translate it. And in Koalisi Seni, we have 1 and 2 persons who have law background, so they kind of help us to translate the needs into the policy recommendation. And because the government need an actionable policy recommendation, it has to be inclusive in some way, because in order to provide a spot-on policy recommendation, we have to know in fact what is happening on the ground. And together, evidence on the ground, we use this research-based approach because Indonesia is so big. So we involve artists through like surveys, like focus group discussions and workshops. And like in the context of artistic freedom, that's why we proposed to UNESCO to develop a monitoring system instead, because people can report submit direct reports to us when they experience violations in artistic freedom. So yeah, the database is publicly accessible for anyone. So and because we are aware that Indonesia is so big, so we kind of like aware that to reach an ideal point in inclusivity, it's not that simple. So we still face challenges to reach other regions outside Java Islands, like especially regions in eastern Indonesia. And actually, I've discussed with friends here that the flight price from Jakarta to eastern Indonesia is higher than price from Jakarta to Singapore, and it's really it's really ironic. And so because we need an inclusive data, we ask for help from our members. So as per today, Koalisi Seni has 340 members, individuals and organizations across 24 provinces out of 38 provinces in Indonesia. So they help us to reach the local community in their network. So yeah, sometimes it's not ideal because they facing challenges in terms of internet connectivity. There's limitation on internet connectivity in those regions. But yeah, we do our best to reach the local community. And also our members are the ones who keep us track regarding inclusivity in implementing our research program. So they keep remind us like, oh Ming, have you reached this local community? Because you have to speak with them regarding this issue. Yeah.
So you do this also on a regular basis, because I imagine every number of months you kind of go back and check, because also maybe art sector people change and you need to make sure that they are also aware that they have this possibility to report as well. So we do this on daily basis, and mostly we do it online.
Okay. Because we have a limitation in resources in terms of budget and human resources.
No, but I mean the geographies are always also a limitation. Unfortunately, when we talk about mobility, what you just said, it's so ironic to think that within a country it's more expensive than going somewhere else, which is why sometimes these kind of mobility routes are very strange. Why do you go here and not maybe somewhere else in Indonesia? Claire, you know more about this. I don't know, maybe you want to say a few things also about it, because you work also with On the Move, and I think the research that you do really gives you a very good perspective of how we can include everybody, but what are the limitations in these two big regions and these very different geographies.
And just to follow up about the travel thing, like in the context of Australia as well, it's the same, that it's more expensive to travel within Australia remotely than it is to have these international connections, which just seems crazy. So someone regionally or remotely who wants the international connections, it's just very difficult, and access is definitely not easy and not taken for granted. But I guess I wanted to give a bit of an example from the Australian context. So Australia is a very multicultural country, and it has a very long history of migration. But then the challenges in the sector, I think I was feeling that they're quite similar to what you were explaining, Tuan, that, for example, in the publishing sector, 6% of the people who work in publishing are non-Caucasian, compared to 32% of the population. So just based on raw numbers, you know, there is a great disparity there. But you know, it's a long-term imbalance that needs to be addressed. So some people are saying, oh, quotas don't work, but, you know, I think it's a starting point to say, okay, there's something not right going on here. It's not our imagination that we look at the street and we look at the publishing or the TV and there's a difference. It's you know, it's there in numbers. And so I think it really needs to be addressed, and I think we've touched upon this at the very beginning. So at the education level, at the interns that you have in the publishing sector, like who is it, who has access to that? And then once they're in there, what kind of challenges are they facing? Like there's been reports of so they're trying to address this challenge in Australia. But there's reports of racism that's rife within the system that's not being dealt with. So they're kind of, you know, trying to get the people in the room, but then after that, you know, it's up to them to figure out their pathway. And I think this has, you know, it has a big impact on maybe cultural diplomacy level because, you know, in the publishing example, you have a very limited diversity of voices who are making the decisions about what kind of stories are authentic. So they might look at an Asian Australian story and say, oh, that doesn't quite sound like what I think an Asian Australian story should sound like, without having any experience themselves. So they're like, oh, that's not authentic, so we can't publish that because there is not enough diversity in the room. No? And so then these books that are getting through and are kind of, you know, these Asian Australian stories that have been stamped as approved then are going to places like, you know, the Frankfurt Book Fair, or I was reading that there's a lot of exchange of translation between Australia and China. That's like a real, it's quite a boom, and there's a lot of work that's being translated. But you know, from these big publishers, what are the stories that are being translated? So I think, you know, making sure that the education and at the beginning level and the mentoring through this whole process is really important. And the other side of that is to sort of be very aware of our own position or our positionality. And I have a quote here from Melinda Bobbis, who's an author and artist based in Australia, originally from the Philippines. And she said that empathy is putting ourselves in the shoes of the other, but they do not become our own shoes. So to try and reach across and understand different points of view, but to be very aware of where we are standing ourselves. And I think that's really important, particularly as we're trying to address these imbalances, to say, okay, where are we standing? What have we missed about our privilege or about where our experience, that we're saying, oh, this isn't the right story, or this isn't the right employee, this isn't the right intern for us, because they're coming from a very different background that perhaps we don't recognise as well. So I think that sort of self-reflection is very important. And I think I was hearing a webinar just the other day with Indigenous artists who were talking about, I mean, what I think you mentioned is the weight of representation as well. So they were saying that, you know, for example, a Taiwanese urban Indigenous artist who had travelled to Canada, which was really influential in the way she saw her indigeneity, now living in Australia, that individual sort of might feel the heaviness of representing Indigenous Taiwan. And she was saying, obviously I can't, there's so much diversity there in my story, and thinking of the different nations and different First Nations in Australia as well, to have one or even two speakers at an event is a lot of weight. And I think as audiences or as mediators and facilitators, perhaps we need to really emphasise looking at nuance and particularities of each situation, to sort of encourage, this is not an Indigenous Australian, or this is not a First Nation Australian, but this is their context. This is where they're speaking from. Don't kind of expect them to speak for everybody. And I think that's perhaps work that, as organisers of events, we have the potential to really encourage that nuance.
Thanks, Claire. Well, Gael, what about institutions? What is the responsibility of institutions?
The nice guys. Okay, so first, symbolic visibility, for me it's branding. And branding will have a lower impact, and also it's not transformative. But I just wanted to divide my short comments on 3 points. First, the time factor. Second, the multiplication factor. And 3, the transversal factor. First, the time factor is key, I think, to achieve genuine inclusion or cooperation. At which step of the programs are underrepresented voices involved? This is very important to achieve not just symbolic visibility. By the way, by symbolic visibility, a perfect example is every year's March 8th roundtable with women speaking. So I think it's another good example. So at which step are those persons involved? And of course, they should be participating when priorities and strategies are defined, to have this horizontal exchange and maybe sometimes grassroots to top. Second, I'm trying to go quickly. Second, with the time factor, second, multiplication factor, to have a real inclusion or collaboration. One project is not enough. Unfortunately, LinkUp is great, and we were happy from Spain to be able to collaborate on 2 editions, I think, and send 2 Spanish, 2 representations from Spain, and 3 maybe. But of course, it's only 3 who this experience had an impact on their life and on the lives maybe of all the persons who participated on LinkUp, but it's still very limited. Even when we have here Asian performance, etc., if we only organize 1 concert, it also doesn't go to Malaga, to Bilbao, etc., or other parts in Europe. So I think it's also an important factor. And last, the transversal issue. For example, persons from the diasporas should not be collaborating with an intercultural department, but rather in an economic department, cultural, education, etc. And we are really working on this hardly. So, and I think things are changing, but there are the 3 points I wanted to stress.
Thank you. I think I want to go back to the time point, because I think also in the conversation that we had, I think spending time is also critical in this case. And as you said, it's also the multiplier effect. How do we do that? How do we make sure that the people who participate in an event like the one we organized then have the possibility to share this with others? There was this concept, this metaphor that was shared by the participant in Yogyakarta about fermentation. So in the conversation that we had over the 5 days, there was this idea that to create these connections, you need to let them ferment and you need to give them time, suggesting basically that cultural diplomacy needs to slow down, because we need time to create the trust, to be patient, to take care, to take attention and care, and to prioritize process over product. So this is completely in contraposition with the reality of things. And the reality of things is that basically we need to do things, we need to do a lot of things, and we need to do them fast. So my question here for you would be, cultural diplomacy takes time, this is clear, yet we have funders, money that is linked to it, and we want to see results. So what would you think would be ways and approaches that we could use to capture the value of these exchanges a long time? Because there's also a problem of how sustainable they are, of how much the impact is there. So do you think there is a way to try and bring nearer the reality of things, which is, let's be fast, let's have a project, let's find the money for it, versus let's take time to make things ferment and develop? Who wants to start? Maybe Claire? Yes.
Yeah, I'm not sure if I'm going to be giving many practical tips. Yeah, and I feel like it's, so the examples I was kind of thinking of, maybe they're things that we've been touching upon in these discussions anyway, but I was kind of reflecting on my own journey of how I got here and my interest in working in this space. And I think one of the things that started it was an Australian government-run program by the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade, which was Australian Youth Ambassadors for Development. So this really comes from, I guess, a more diplomatic side of things, where they would send young workers out into the Asia-Pacific region. And the idea, like the measurement of it was really, to develop partnerships, which was done, on the organisational side, but also to develop cultural awareness and to build stronger connections. So I think, and I think there are challenges with that, in that it was very one-directional. And there are definitely imbalances, but I can sort of see in different spots, and culture definitely wasn't a big part of it, but there were some kind of projects that were out there, and you sort of see them pop up later. There's a really interesting documentary that was made from an Australian filmmaker in Mongolia, with really deep insights and relationships that came out of this kind of process. So I think, having more cultural representation on these, maybe programs run in the context of foreign affairs and diplomacy, can be quite interesting, because that is about, developing language skills, developing a sort of cultural awareness as a way to find space for this time, and particularly at a young time. And maybe programs like Erasmus here in Europe do that to a certain degree, that you have student exchanges as well, where it's a time in your life where you do have this time for the more intangible elements that are really important. And I think how can we kind of expand upon these very individual experiences? What are we going to then do with it? And I think this role of, Gail, you mentioned the multipliers or the intermediaries, so those kind of, in a way, cultural translators between different contexts, I think are very important, and that can help these processes that sometimes have to be a bit quick and fast. So you have people who have been working in this space for years and years and years to kind of help ease the communication and the meeting. I think those roles are very interesting. So I don't know if it's a way of like formalising this in a way, or kind of facilitating that. There's kind of an interesting tool, thinking of like education, and I think it came out in the lab in Prague, was that perhaps going from the other side of things, for those working in diplomacy, perhaps there needs to be more awareness about the specificities of cultural practices, to be aware, like, what is an artist residency? Why do artists need to travel? What are they, how does it work? So there was a recommendation from that lab to have more of that cultural diplomacy education within sort of the education or the professional development of diplomacy or diplomats or those working in that field. and On the Move has developed quite a practical tool, I think, which is like a lexicon aimed at people working in embassies with key terms and ways of working from the artistic field to help those who are making decisions perhaps about artistic visas. Like, why do they need to travel? Is it for profit? Is it not? You know, so this kind of lexicon can help raise awareness about the practicalities of how does an artist make a living? What do they need? So that there's, you know, on this practical level at the time of giving a visa, there's more understanding about these topics. So
Thanks.
That's about it.
Gael? Yeah, I wanted to ask you, I mean, the same thing, but from an institutional point of view, the problem is accountability versus long-term processes. Is there anything in Casa Asia that you do towards this, or that, you know, you can share that you agree with this issue, with this challenge, or maybe not?
I agree with this challenge. Actually, I know we have redesigned a little bit all this system, but I think during the cocktail we can speak to our Director General to
Maybe you want to share with everyone.
The last news, but I just can say something on my own point of view. First, for me, introducing numbers to measure the impact of cultural projects, for me it's a difficult thing to understand, and I agree numbers are important, but for example in the Erasmus project, with the same budget, if you send students 1 week to another European country, of course you will send thousands of more students, but the Erasmus for 1 year exchange is really life-changing and really connecting and really much more interesting. And also I would maybe, as a suggestion, maybe to allow different timelines for different projects. For example, measure outcomes right after a project, or also maybe see 1 year after or 6 months after did it really bring something, change something, etc. Did it increase mutual understanding, etc. And also the factor of multiple projects, if it's a project which can be repeated. And also I think something this can be interesting is to introduce measurements from different point of views. For example, from the point of view of the public institution, what are the key factors we need to assess this project? But if we think from the point of view of the civil society, maybe there are other kind of benefits.
Trying to bring together different point of view in terms of also how to evaluate the impact.
Yes, maybe.
It's the impact for the participant,
Yes.
for the institution, for the funders, and so on.
Yes.
Okay. Oming, anything to share for this? I'm sure you also have challenges because you work directly with the government, so I'm sure they want to see results, they want to evaluate impact.
Yeah.
Is this...
Maybe I want to, if you see my picture.
Yeah, it's there.
There is a F, U, N, and D. So I'm kind of like, can we have fun at the center, but on ASEF LinkUp, we also aware that we need fun with D. but I unconsciously put the D outside the circle. So it's kind of like how we can prioritize fun, but it's, of course, it's really hard, In Indonesia, well, I think for us to not see culture as an things that generate profit or generate numbers, I think we have to shift our perspective to see culture again as an integral part of universal human rights, and it's essential for us to imagining our future. And this means when we see culture that way, what we need to check in is more on whether people have, again, equal access to practice the culture, to pass the culture on to next generation, and also benefit from it safely. And for me, this means looking at both supporting and hindering factors. For example, do regulation protect artists' rights, or do they create barriers? Is there adequate infrastructure such as public spaces, community centers, and funding schemes that enables cultural practice? Are there, again, education systems and knowledge sharing platforms that help culture to be learned or passed on? And for us, it's important to see, are there any political pressures like censorship or discrimination that prevent people from participating fully? So when we see and when we measuring how alive culture is, it requires us to look at the whole ecosystem, not just outputs or economic impact. And actually in Indonesia, we didn't have a specific legal framework for advancing culture until 2017. And Koalisi Seni started advocating for this law since 2014. And this law called the Law on the Advancement of Culture, it passed in 2017, and it became the first law in Indonesia to see culture as public good. And it actually mandates the government to support culture, including arts, regardless of whether they generate economic impact or not. It also mandates the government to create a cultural endowment fund for people and make it accessible for everyone. And until now, this law is effective in 2017, but until now, Koalisi Seni still monitors the implementation, especially regarding the Culture Endowment Fund. And from our observation and also our communication with the Ministry of Culture, we still face a challenge in convincing the Ministry of Finance the importance of the Culture Endowment Fund, because they use this economic impact as a measure, as an indicator if it's important or not to support. So yeah, especially now when the Indonesian government is insisting the budget efficiency, it's kind of like start to hard to convince the Ministry of Finance. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks for sharing. I think this is really an interesting example, because in a way it's quite great to see that there is a policy about advancing culture, recognizing culture as a right, public good. But then, as you said, there are so many different ministries involved. Yeah. If you use different kind of ways to assess that are not from the cultural sector, then the question is, are those really the right ways to measure if this kind of activity is successful or not, what's the impact or not? Okay, maybe we finish with one?
Yeah. I want to answer that question too. And I'm an artist now, but I come from innovation world. I used to work in tech. So are you familiar with agile methodologies?
Yes.
So for who are not familiar, basically agile methodologies say, fail soon, learn fast. So one of my latest projects are Ellas son Ciencia. It's called Ellas son Ciencia, and we're trying to create female role models that are Spanish-speaking ones, because science is always disseminated in English as lingua franca, but if you publish a paper, for example, in Mandarin, it doesn't have the same sight that if you do it in English. And then in Spanish, mira. So we partner ECUSA, which is Spanish scientists in the United States, and me for create this series of comics with little money, very, very tiny. So how do we manage this little budget to make the maximum impact as possible? So we need to measure, we need to test. That's why I say fail soon, learn fast. So we have some hypotheses. One of them was, are the school in Spain interested in comics for teaching? So I say to them, we should use social media to do an open call so we can test the desirability of the material. So we're going to distribute this for free, but people need to sign up first and give us their data to see which school they're teaching. So when we put that advertising though for a couple of €100, very low, we received more than 600 petitions for the free material, from big school to tiny ones of we call it pedania. Pedania is very, not even a town, very small areas of 500 people. They don't have access to this kind of educational material to talk about women and talk about comics. So this was a way for us to test if people were receiving our material, in a way with the little money that we had. So Ellas son Ciencia kept growing, and another test was how engaged teachers are with our material. So we did a workbook, and then again we got a huge amount of petitions, hundreds and hundreds of teachers saying that they wanted that workbook. But then we found out that even though they asked for the workbook, nobody gave us feedback, and somehow that workbook failed. So what was happening there? Again, we used a fair amount of money for creating the workbook and then the open call. So we did interviews afterwards. We found some teachers, give them, please read this, where we have failed, because people wanted free material, people like the comics, what happened with the workbook. And the public school here, sometimes they don't have much funding, and the teachers are overloaded with work. So if you give them an overcomplicated or too much, not complicated, that it takes a lot of resources to make the book or make the activities, they're probably not going to make it because they have already a lot of work in their hands. So we fail, we learn, and another thing that we tested is people really like the comic and people really like exhibitions at school. So we produce an exhibition for free in a material like PVC, so it's not cardboard. And it's a rotating free school exhibition that they can ask, and they will be at their school for 1 month or for a couple of weeks. We are always working with public schools. So this year, our partners say we have already 6 schools that want that exhibition with us. And that's a very very low budget, very high rewarding experiments that we did in order to test, in order to also measure. And when we get bigger funding, we know where to put that money. Maybe producing more comics and maybe producing a short, but some we fail soon, it hurt, but then we are learning fast and we keep improving Ellas son Ciencia. Also, those comics are translated into regional Spanish languages. It's also translated to Catalan, Euskera, Gallego, and we distribute it especially, for example, in a special day, the Dia de Andalucía. So we send to the schools that are in Andalucía, hey, these scientists are from Andalucía, take a look into this and maybe teach it during your class. El Día de las Letras Galegas, so we send it to Galicia to say, hey, this is also it's translated to Gallego, you might take a look into it. And it's so nice because they also feel, this could be me. I could be this astrophysics from Vigo, that she was alone, only woman working in NASA. But now you know what's happening in the United States, so we don't know anymore about scientists. But this is one of my favorite commission projects that we did this methodology to learn.
It's really interesting. Again, goes back to the education, language. I think also looking at languages, representation. Yeah. So a lot of food for thought. I think we're almost wrapping up here. Before we do that, I just had like one future-looking question that I wanted to share with you and see what you have in mind. So my question is, if we imagine cultural diplomacy in 30 years from now, 25, 30 years, what would you hope it has achieved, and what structural or mindset changes we must try to look at now? Yes, Gael.
Very short answer, that's why I asked for the mic. Very short, but I think it sums up everything. So I don't know if she will agree, but my hope is that for example, Trenjo becomes Minister of Foreign Affairs of Spain or Minister of Culture. This is my input.
I think this is the most direct and clearest way to say it. Thank you very much. I like that.
Well, that's a high state.
We will wait for this to happen in maybe even less than 30 years. A little less.
It's good, I met the last I think she's still president of the Greens Party of European one, Terry, and she said, you should be a politician.
I agree. Do you agree with Gail? Any other ideas of what we should do now?
I think for me, just maybe we can do this next year, like move this kind of platform from Europe to Asia, so I don't have to apply for visa.
Thank you for this.
Because it's very stressful.
Yeah.
It's really stressful process for me to apply for
Absolutely.
visa here.
I mean, I want to really stress that because it's a journey every time, and this is really one of the most easy thing that could be corrected, but still there's so many barriers to Asian, Southeast Asian traveling to Europe and not the other way around. So what you suggest is the easy way, but the best way would be to reduce the barriers for Asian people to travel to Europe and maybe make it more balanced so that we can do events both in Asia and Europe.
Yes, please.
Thanks. Claire?
I guess I was thinking it's always the context and conditions and ways of working are always changing, but I guess I would like to see many people with the goodwill to try and work together, and the goodwill and empathy. So that's what I would like to see.
Thank you.
I would like to see an active anti-racist perspective integrated in institution of cultural diplomacy.
I think you're giving us some good ideas for the next edition of this program, which will be next year in Europe. So I think we'll talk to you more because I think a lot of things we can explore further for next year.